Welcome back to our channel on this beautiful, crisp day. As the leaves begin to turn and the winds of change sweep through our lives, we dive deep into the latest, most earth-shattering developments from Genoa City. The emotional landscape of our favorite families is about to be permanently altered, so settle in as we unpack a revelation that will echo through generations. The sterile, suffocating walls of the Genoa City Rehabilitation Center stand as a stark contrast to the opulent, sprawling estate of the Newman Ranch. Yet for Nicholas Newman, this clinical environment has become the ultimate battleground for his very soul. The lingering shadows of his recent, catastrophic relapse alongside Marie Kirkland continue to haunt his every waking moment, a dark reminder of the insidious nature of his fentanyl addiction. Nick is a man entirely stripped of his former bravado, reduced to a raw, exposed nerve ending, desperately trying to find a reason to endure the agonizing process of withdrawal. The physical toll of the narcotics is evident in the hollowed contours of his face and the perpetual tremor in his hands, but it is the psychological devastation that truly threatens to consume him. He is drowning in a sea of guilt, remorse, and an overwhelming sense of inadequacy, feeling that he has failed not only himself, but the entire legacy that his last name represents. Every ticking second in that facility is a monumental struggle against the siren call of the drugs that promise temporary oblivion from the crushing weight of his reality. Into this atmosphere of profound despair walks Nikki Newman, a matriarch who bears her own invisible, agonizing scars. Having recently navigated the terrifying labyrinth of her own vision loss and the manipulative machinations of her husband, Victor, Nikki approaches her broken son with a heart heavy with maternal sorrow. She observes Nick from the doorway before making her presence known, her heart shattering at the sight of the strong, vibrant man she raised, now huddled in the corner of a sterile room, fighting a war against an invisible, merciless enemy. Nikki carries the immense burden of the Newman family's collective sins, acutely aware that the toxic, high-pressure environment cultivated by Victor has played a significant role in driving their children towards self-destruction. She steps into the room not just as a mother seeking to comfort her child, but as a survivor of the very same familial crossfire that has left Nick fighting for his life, carrying a secret that feels heavier with every step she takes toward him. Attempting to anchor her son in the storm of his addiction, Nikki begins to weave a narrative of ancestral strength, desperately trying to impart the legendary resilience of the Newman dynasty. She recounts the countless times their family has been pushed to the absolute brink of annihilation, only to rise from the ashes with renewed ferocity and unyielding determination. Nikki emphasizes that the blood flowing through Nick's veins is synonymous with survival, a biological imperative to conquer adversity no matter how insurmountable the odds may appear. She paints a picture of a family that, despite its deep, festering dysfunctions and ruthless internal wars, possesses an unbreakable core that can weather any tempest. Her words are meant to be a lifeline, a reminder of the inherent power that comes with his lineage, hoping that the pride of being a Newman will somehow ignite a spark of defiance against the chemical dependency that holds him captive. However, the invocation of the Newman name does not provide the salvation Nikki intended. Instead, it acts as a suffocating blanket over Nick's already fragile psyche. To Nick, the Newman legacy is not a source of strength, but a gilded cage of impossible expectations, ruthless betrayals, and conditional love dictated by the whims of a domineering patriarch. He processes his mother's words through the distorted lens of his trauma, silently acknowledging that it was precisely the crushing pressure of being Victor Newman's son that drove him to seek the numbing embrace of fentanyl in the first place. The constant need to measure up, the endless corporate warfare, and the emotional manipulation have hollowed him out, leaving a void that the drugs so easily filled. Nick's internal monologue is a chaotic swirl of resentment and despair, feeling that the very heritage his mother is championing is the poison that has slowly been killing him for years. Witnessing the profound desolation in her son's eyes, Nikki experiences a moment of acute, heart-wrenching vulnerability that shatters her carefully maintained composure. She realizes with horrifying clarity that the Newman identity is not saving Nick, it is actively destroying him. This epiphany forces Nikki to confront the deepest, most closely guarded ghosts of her past, specifically her complicated, passionate, and historically significant relationship with Jack Abbott. The memories of a time before the absolute dominance of Victor Newman flood her consciousness, bringing with them the agonizing weight of a lie she has maintained for decades. Nikki recognizes that in order to free Nick from the toxic expectations of his presumed lineage, she must dismantle the very foundation of his identity, a decision that requires an unimaginable level of sacrifice and courage. In a trembling, emotionally fractured state, Nikki makes the fateful decision to cross the Rubicon of their family's history. Stripped of all pretense and driven by a desperate maternal need to liberate her son from the Newman curse, she delivers a confession that halts the rotation of the earth beneath them. With tears streaming down her face and her voice breaking under the weight of decades of deception, Nikki reveals the earth-shattering truth that Victor Newman is not his biological father. She carefully, painfully articulates the reality that her past romance with Jack Abbott resulted in a pregnancy she had concealed from the world, and that Jack, the patriarch of the rival Abbott dynasty, is the man whose blood actually courses through Nick's veins. The revelation is delivered not with malice, but with a profound, tragic sorrow, an unburdening of a soul that can no longer bear to watch her child die for a legacy that isn't truly his. The immediate psychological impact on Nick is nothing short of catastrophic, a complete and total annihilation of his known universe. The cognitive dissonance is deafening as his brain struggles to process a reality that fundamentally contradicts 30 years of existence. Every memory, every scolding from Victor, every moment of desperate striving to earn his father's approval is instantly rendered a grotesque, meaningless lie. Nick sits entirely paralyzed, a deafening ringing in his ears blocking out the sound of his mother's continued weeping as the foundational pillars of his identity crumble into microscopic dust. He is no longer the heir apparent to the Newman Empire. He is the biological offspring of his family's most hated, historical enemy, a truth so profoundly disorienting that it threatens to snap the final, fragile threads of his sanity. As the shock begins to recede, it is rapidly replaced by a surging, acidic tide of ultimate betrayal that burns through Nick's veins. The woman sitting before him, the mother who was supposed to be his ultimate protector and confidant, has been the architect of a monumental deception that has defined his entire life. Nick feels an excruciating sense of violation, realizing that his entire existence has been a pawn in a twisted game of marital preservation and dynastic optics. The trust that forms the bedrock of a mother-son relationship is instantly incinerated, leaving behind a toxic residue of anger and profound isolation. He looks at Nikki not as a mother offering a lifeline, but as a stranger who has stolen his true identity, denying him the right to know his real father, and forcing him to endure the psychological torture of Victor's conditional love under entirely false pretenses. This reality-altering trauma immediately triggers the most severe, primal cravings for fentanyl that Nick has experienced since entering the rehabilitation facility. The emotional agony is so acute, so entirely unbearable, that his brain automatically screams for the chemical obliteration that the narcotics provide. The fragile scaffolding of his recovery, built on the premise of healing his family wounds, collapses under the weight of this new, impossible reality. Nick is suddenly standing on the precipice of a catastrophic relapse, the desire to escape the pain of his mother's betrayal far outweighing any logical commitment to his sobriety. The rehab center, once a sanctuary for healing, now feels like a prison where he is trapped with the agonizing truth of his illegitimate existence, making the threat of a fatal overdose a terrifyingly imminent possibility. The ripple effects of this revelation extend far beyond the sterile walls of Nick's rehab room, casting a dark, ominous shadow over the entire Newman Empire. The impending doom of Victor Newman discovering this truth is a ticking time bomb with the power to level Genoa City. Victor, a man whose entire identity is built on absolute control, legacy, and a deep historical jealousy of Jack Abbott, will undoubtedly view this biological truth as the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal. The realization that he has raised, funded, and groomed the son of his most despised rival will ignite a wrath of biblical proportions. Victor's reaction will not be one of sorrow, but of ruthless, scorched earth vengeance, threatening to completely annihilate his marriage to Nikki and launch a devastating, unprecedented war against the Abbott family. Concurrently, the psychological implications for Jack Abbott are equally staggering, presenting a moral and emotional crisis of unimaginable magnitude. Jack, currently drowning in his own family turmoil regarding Billy's manic corporate crusade, is entirely ignorant of the fact that he has a biological son currently fighting for his life in a rehabilitation center. When the truth inevitably reaches him, Jack will be forced to reconcile decades of lost time, missed opportunities, and the horrifying realization that his own flesh and blood has been subjected to the psychological torment of Victor Newman's parenting. The patriarch of the Abbott family will be thrust into a desperate scramble to save a son he never knew he had, adding a layer of profound tragedy to his already overflowing cup of familial sorrow. This biological revelation fundamentally shifts the tectonic plates of Genoa City, permanently altering the dynastic landscape of the Newman and Abbott families. The long-standing corporate and personal warfare between the two empires is now irreversibly complicated by a blood tie that bridges the seemingly insurmountable divide. Every inheritance, every corporate succession plan, and every familial alliance is instantly thrown into chaotic jeopardy. Nick, once the golden boy of Newman Enterprises, is now the biological heir to Jabbott Cosmetics, a twist of fate that will force both families to completely reevaluate their loyalties, their hatreds, and their ultimate goals. The boardroom battles will no longer be just about money and power. They will be deeply, painfully personal wars over identity, blood, and the right to claim a son torn between two warring kingdoms. Left alone in the suffocating silence of his room after his mother's departure, Nick is consumed by a profound, chilling isolation that transcends mere physical solitude. He is a man without a country, a son without a true surname, floating in a terrifying void of existential dread. The puzzle he had been working on with Marie Kirkland sits abandoned on the table, a cruel metaphor for his own fractured, incomplete life. He stares at his trembling hands, wondering whose blood truly dictates his actions, whose legacy he is actually meant to carry. The urge to flee, to find the nearest dealer, and sink into the warm, dark embrace of the drugs is a physical ache in his chest, a desperate need to silence the screaming voices of his shattered reality. The collision course between the Newmans and the Abbotts is now set, fueled by a secret too massive to be contained. Nikki's desperate attempt to free her son has instead ignited a powder keg that will consume everyone she loves. The emotional wounds inflicted by this lie will fester and rot, destroying the fragile trust between brothers, lovers, and parents. As the truth begins its inevitable, destructive march through the corridors of power in Genoa City, the collateral damage will be incalculable. The battle lines are being redrawn not with corporate contracts, but with DNA, setting the stage for a conflict that will test the absolute limits of human endurance and forgiveness. As the sun sets over the rehabilitation center, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor, Nick remains motionless, a prisoner in his own mind. The chilling reality of his existence settles over him like a burial shroud, the weight of the Abbott and Newman legacies threatening to crush his fragile sobriety into dust. He is the living embodiment of his mother's greatest sin and his presumed father's ultimate humiliation. The silence of the room is deafening, broken only by the ragged, uneven sound of his own breathing as he stares into the abyss of his new identity. As the irresistible urge to escape through the needle grows stronger by the second, one terrifying, unanswered question hangs in the cold air. When the ruthless, unforgiving wrath of Victor Newman is finally unleashed upon the son of his greatest enemy, will Nick Abbott even survive long enough to claim his true name?